What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Of Like Minds video podcast. Got a super special guest today, good homie of mine, Mr. Nathan Huynh. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on today, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate you just asking me. And I think kind of what we were talking about earlier, it was a pretty interesting circumstance for us to just come together. And it was um, very fortunate that it happened, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah, of all places, a dance class bringing us back together, and we'll get into dance in a little bit, but just kind of starting us off today, Nathan. If you can just talk a little bit about what childhood was like and what it was like growing up, and where
Okay.
you grew up at.
Okay. So um, I was actually born in, I don't know how far back I'm supposed to go,
Yeah.
but I was born in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I moved here when I was 1 years old. So, you know, practically I was raised and born in Boston, but practically raised in San Diego. I've moved maybe 16 times in San Diego. I've lived all over the place. My parents are also divorced, so that kind of explains that number. Um, but I've been a bunch of different public schools growing up from elementary all the way to high. And then in high school, I actually settled down and went to Torrey Pines High School up in North County. Um, Very nice neighborhood, very nice school. That's where my mom had been living at the time. And so I'd say I had a pretty fortunate, um, I guess, high school experience, kind of, I guess, very fortunate adolescence, which is one of the most important times I feel like in a person's life. So I got to have a lot of opportunities in terms of education, in terms of networking with kids that were, from, um, I guess, wealthy families and whatnot. And so from there, I applied for college and I got into the University of San Francisco. And I applied to a lot of different schools, but my brother at the time had been living up in San Francisco. He's a SFSU alum. So he was living up there and I just kind of felt the need to kind of go to a big city, which is, I think is pretty typical for people who are that age, or I guess young adults at that age. And so, and then also, kind of what we were talking about before, USF is a private school. And um, in fact, they gave me a financial aid package that made my out of the pocket costs even cheaper than a lot of the other schools that I was applying to, namely a lot of the states and the UCs. So I just decided to pick up and go. Um, so I went up there and I majored, or I was attempting to major in entrepreneurship and innovation. So I knew I wanted to do something business related from the bat, from the get go. So I spent 2 years up there. I actually danced up there too. I got to dance with APT and also got to be on training ground back to back those 2 consecutive years that I was up there. Had a lot of fun. I met a lot of amazing people. I just ended up being way too expensive, especially me having a home down here. And it took me those 2 years to kind of understand what I took for granted back home in San Diego, which I think was valuable. And so I applied to transfer back down to the University of San Diego. Right around that time, I kind of realized that I had an interest in real estate for some reason. Also, my family is in, I guess you could say, in the business as well. And so I knew that I wanted to do something in that direction. So at the same time, I was working on getting my California real estate salesperson's license. So I started getting that when I was like 18. I remember I was up in SF and like literally the week I moved in, I was studying for the salesperson's license exam. But it took me like 2 years basically to get it, or no, 3 years to get it. So finally, when I moved down, and I kind of went on a tangent, but I applied to USD because they have one of the best programs in real estate in the entire nation. It's more so talking about their master's program in real estate, the top in the nation. But their undergraduate, as a result, is also very strong. And so I knew that, and it was at home, and I just decided to apply. And once again, they gave me a really, really good financial aid package. I still had to take out loans as well for USD,
Mhm.
um, but it ended up all working out. Um, and so I moved back down, moved in with my mom. Then I finished off my undergraduate degree at UST. I double majored in real estate and finance. I got my salesperson's license after 3 years, which is, it's not supposed to take you that long.
Mhm.
It's really not, but it took me that long. And then while I was at USC, I held a couple of internships in the field, made a lot of connections, and that's how I landed that job at KPMG. So
Whew.
that's a lot. You
Yeah.
said a lot.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, thank you for, kind of taking us through that arc, and we're obviously going to dig deeper into all those things, but I think something that stood out to me and that I completely forgot is um you talking about, your parents being divorced, and that's
Mm,
something that you and I have related on before and talked about.
mm-hmm.
And for me, that happened at the age of 12, and I was just wondering if you'd maybe feel okay to share about, I mean, how that kind of helped you and motivated you and helped catapult you into where you're at today. And
Oh
even
yeah,
when did that happen to you? So when did it happen, and how did that affect you after the divorce of your parents?
sure. So I was pretty young when my parents got divorced. Um, so I didn't really have to experience too much of, I guess, their turbulent relationship before they got divorced, which I feel like is a lot of times the hardest part for kids to experience. Um, Everything after that, I mean, it it can be inconvenient having to live in two different houses and travel in between two different homes. But I actually, now that I think, at the time I never wasn't thinking about it, but now that I think about it, looking retrospectively, I think that really helped me out, and I actually prefer that. I
Mm,
got to live in two different homes. I got to meet more people, live and learn about two different communities, and just have a more varied life, I guess. And then on top of that, leading into what I was talking about, moving around like 16 times. I've lived as far north as Oceanside, as far east as Fallbrook, as far south as Otay. I've lived all over in San Diego. I feel like it's
mm,
really, really helped me to just, one thing, get my bearing here in San Diego and understanding all these different communities, but just kind of, I guess, broadening my understanding of just broadening my understanding. Period. I guess. So I think that's something that you get. Um, I mean, something optimistic to take from being from a broken family for sure is it could be abrasive, it could be inconvenient, but at the same time, you become, in my case, I became a lot more richer of a person just
mm.
going through that. I don't know if that was the same situation for you, but
Yeah. No, absolutely. It has a lot to do with the mental makeup and who we are, and how we view things, and
mm-hmm,
even just our tendencies. So I completely agree with you. At the time, it was really shitty, but in retrospect, like you said, it's just like you wouldn't be who you are
mm-hmm,
without it, and you have to be thankful for it. And I love how you said that too. How you looked at that as like the kind of the glass half full. Like, I get to meet more people, and I get to live in
yeah,
two houses, and I get to have two rooms, and that's like a weird
yeah,
thing that you just kind of have to, like, maybe at the time you're like psyching yourself. You're like, all right, this is a shitty, but you know what? Like, this is also like, there's also some really cool niches that are happening in my life.
yeah, yeah,
Um, with that too, Nathan, you talked about living all over in San Diego.
mm-hmm,
Um, I'm I have to imagine that growing up in the school system,
mm-hmm,
that inconsistency of constantly moving. I mean, one, how did that affect you in terms of friendships, friend
mm-hmm,
groups, just having stable, steady relationships throughout your adolescence? Like, what was
mm-hmm.
that like during that time?
Yeah, that that's a pretty deep question, and I've actually thought about that a decent amount. Um, it's really tough moving around. I mean, I guess the more exaggerated example would be maybe living in a military family. I've heard a lot of stories where you're moving base to base and you don't even have a chance to meet anyone, let alone become friends and develop social circles. So I think in my case, I did go to a lot of different public schools around the city, and I really did not keep a whole lot of friends along the way. And I think that even translated over to when I went to high school and went to college. I guess, developed a more transient personality and a transient lifestyle when it came to my social life. In a lot of ways, I think and maybe this is just another half glass full view on that, just as we were talking about the other topic before. But I just feel like that has benefited me in a lot of ways in terms of not getting attached to people, not feeling devastated when I have to move somewhere else, or feel devastated when someone else moves somewhere else, or even um, another example would be like people come and go, right? You're never, there's always going to be people who are transient in your life, and you yourself are going to be transient with other people.
Mm.
And so I think you kind of learn that when you move around and do all these different things. And I feel like I got to learn that really, really quickly from even childhood, to just not really attach on to anyone or anything, and being okay with letting go and saying bye to people, and understanding that, people come and go, um, or people go and leave, but they can also come back, just having, I guess, a broader perspective on that whole thing. Because I mean, I met a lot of people who will cling on and grasp on to maybe like a social circle or something like that.
Mm.
And it becomes it becomes that I shouldn't say that. That's a pretty negative word, but they invest a lot into their relationships, to
Mm.
the point where if something turbulent were to happen or someone to move away, it becomes kind of tragic, right? So
Mm.
um, that's what I've learned from moving around all over the place, and also that relates also to what we're talking about in terms of having a broken family and just um, having your hands dipped in a lot of different things. So that's the jam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you constantly moving around, and you talking about, not really feeling attached, and being able to just pick up and go, and not really feeling too committed to, a particular space, or what have you. How would you say, like, do you think that kind of benefited you, or maybe kind of was at a disadvantage, for you in your decision to go to school? Because, at the time you go into college and you were going to leave San Diego, and for a new environment, you're used to new environments. So do you think like that constant moving around and that constant influx of just different environments, do you think that kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, like I want to do this because I'm just used to doing this, or it's like I just need to get out of San Diego because I feel like I've
Yeah.
experienced everything? Well, what was that like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then in the same token, right? Like there's always a balance, like just as I could say being transient is great, I get to move around and meet all these different people and don't get attached. At the same time, like you're kind of right in all those other things where like I never really developed a whole lot of strong relationships with people or strong relationships with places or communities and whatnot. So there's a balance, right? And at the same time, um, yeah, just all those things that I just mentioned. But I think for me, when I moved up to the Bay, um, I I really just wanted to experience something completely different. And I don't necessarily think that that's just a trait of someone who had a, transient. I keep using the word transient. I can't think of another word. Who had a lifestyle like I did growing up. That's what a lot of people feel. Just having a desire to have a different change of scenery, right? And I think that's more so what went into me going up there.
Mm,
And by the end of 2 years, I really couldn't wait to come back home to San Diego. And
mm,
now, I guess, kind of contradicting what I was saying. Now that I'm back here in San Diego and I've been here for 2 years, like I feel like I don't want to leave anytime soon.
mm.
So those things, I guess, change over time, right?
Yeah.
So and change, it definitely depends on the situation too. So I really I didn't enjoy just being under such dire circumstances up there and paying so much in terms of cost of living and having a car and getting like 7 tickets and getting towed. Like that definitely added to me wanting to just settle down and stay somewhere,
Mm,
specifically in San Diego.
yeah.
Um, at the same token, it's like when you stay somewhere that's so secure and um, like when I was in San Diego, still in high school, you want to experience something like that. It's almost like a grass is greener type of situation.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's probably what you experienced too, right? When you went
Hmm.
up to LA.
Yeah. Same thing, same thing. And I think just kind of going back to, the dynamic of growing up in two households, what was it like in terms of higher education, like that idea? What was it
Mm,
like, hearing from your parents and what they wanted, coming from, you know, our culture, Asian culture? It's very
mm.
like deeply rooted in us to do well in
Oh
school.
yeah.
So what was it like growing up in terms of you're having to hear two different ways of how we want you to do, your mom and your
Yeah.
dad? So what was that dynamic like and that influence into higher education and pursuing that?
Yeah, I think a lot of different cultures besides Asian, um, the Asian culture, specifically talking about like the relationship between parents, kids, and education. I think there's a lot of different cultures that, you know, valuing higher education isn't necessarily a cultural thing. I think more specifically with us being Asian American, more specifically my parents being immigrants, I think
Mm,
it's just higher education um, is a lot more dire and is a lot more consequential to like specifically talking about my family. I probably shouldn't generalize across the board because I don't really 100% know. But for my parents, like my dad was a refugee from Vietnam. He came here when he was very young, maybe 10 years old, and he got sponsorship. And he lived, even back in Vietnam, he lived a pretty, what's the word? Um, Pretty tough life, for lack of better words. I remember him telling me stories about how like whenever sometimes he would eat dinner and he would just have to eat leftover rice from a restaurant. They had to clean off ants from it just to make it clean and stuff. So he came from a really, really tough background and built a whole lot coming over here. He ended up going to college, um, getting a higher education degree and, you know, working a lot of very impressive jobs over his life. He's a network engineer.
mm,
Um, and then my mom as well, being an immigrant from China, from communist China, she always tells me like I had to escape that country. I came here. She became a home care nurse and then got into real estate eventually. So they accomplished so much in their life, you
mhm,
know. And I think when you think about their life experience, higher education is it's expected of you. You know,
mm,
it's not even like, oh, we hope that you will pursue higher education. And then that's another thing, right? Higher education doesn't necessarily correlate to you becoming successful, right? At the end of the day,
absolutely.
they just want you to become successful.
Hmm.
But the only way that they were able to do that as immigrants was to get a college degree. So
Hmm.
that's their way of saying, we want you to be successful. Or not just that, you are going to be successful because we had to go through what we did. And that, you know, just results in you having to go to college. It's just what it is, you know. And you don't have to, but obviously there's a lot of disappointment if you don't pursue that route. Um, and then, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily like just an Asian American thing. I think more specifically, it could be tied to maybe your parents being immigrants of any
Hmm.
culture.
Yeah.
I think that that's a big deal because, you know, as an immigrant, you have to struggle and you have to find a way to have that social mobility, and the college education has historically been the way to do that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, for me, that's yeah, and I guess for a lot of other people who are like me, just being Asian American, I guess there's that pressure that's there. It's very real.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Absolutely. And you going to the University of San Francisco. Well, when did that idea of, you wanting to pursue, business and entrepreneurship,
Mm,
when did that first like become like a I'm gonna do that and commit to that and
mm.
go for this? Like when did that even first spark for you?
Yeah, I owe um, my career, I guess, goals and mindset pretty much entirely to my mom. Like
Mm,
she became a businesswoman pretty late in life, I guess, after she was a home care nurse. Um, but she even in high school, she would always complain to me. I always tell her I'm taking all these classes, or like this semester I get to take engineering, or this semester I get to take science, and she'd be like, "Hey, do they have like a personal finance for class for you guys in high school?" And
Mm.
I was like, "What?" And that's a very real question, right? Like,
Yeah.
so she's very practical in that sense when it comes to finance and business. And so when I went to, and then all on top of that, when I was still in high school, I was just not a good student. Like I'm not a book smart person. It takes me, um, I guess I don't have that kind of patience and discipline to be in a field, maybe like some field in STEM, or to go like a pre-med route. It's just, I don't think I have that kind of discipline and patience to
Mm.
be that
Yeah.
book smart and to be that disciplined in terms of academia. So when I went to school, I figured, this sounds like a pretty good gig for me. And also, um, kind of relating to the lack of education or financial education in high
Mm.
school, I kind of felt like, hey, like what is this whole business thing? What are all these accounting classes, or what could I get myself into studying entrepreneurship and innovation at this school? It sounds very intriguing, right?
Yeah.
And in the U.S., I think also there's a lot of rhetoric for business being very sexy, right? So like entrepreneurship, that sounds, or even like real estate, right? That sounds so sexy. That sounds like, wow, that. I don't even know what that is, but I kind of want to study it just because
Mm.
I think that's the kind of capitalist culture,
Yeah.
in the US. So those are the kind of things that drew, but mostly it was family related. A lot of conversations where my mom was like, "Hey, you could be like a CPA," or "Oh, you could be like you could work for a bank or something." And I was like, that sounds pretty good."
Hmm.
So I just did that.
And that encouragement, that didn't ever feel like you were being pigeonholed into like she wanted you to do this. It was more like a suggestion. You're like, I'm open to that. That sounds awesome. Like, what was that? What
Yeah,
was that like?
I think it was more so just a lack of any other idea. I mean, I knew I wanted to do something that was more what's the word? I knew I wanted to do something that was more concrete, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to study something that I felt like I was not going to maximize my college tuition on. And
Mm.
so, I mean, even thinking of it like that kind of alludes to sort of like a business mindset.
Yeah.
But so, but so, pretty much just those conversations. I mean, it was never, I never felt like it was forced on me or anything. Um, I think if I had an idea of something else that I wanted to do, maybe I was hell bent on, I don't know, becoming an architect or studying design or something.
Mm.
It probably would have felt a little bit more forced, but I had really no idea of what I wanted to do in the first place. So it was more so like I was a blank slate, um, open to suggestions kind of thing.
Mm. Absolutely. And kind of now getting into your transition, going to, San Francisco and that
Mhm.
first move into undergrad. And if you can just talk about what the transition was like for you, obviously you were kind of accustomed to already moving and new scenery, but you're now leaving, San Diego
Mm-hmm.
and you're growing up and you've got to jumble a bunch of different things outside of the classroom. You kind of
Mm.
even alluded to it and talked about the other things in terms of getting parking tickets and being in a big
Oh
city.
my gosh.
You can just talk about like what it was like to be in San Francisco, your experience.
Yeah. So, uh, I mean, I definitely got what I sought for in terms of just having a crazy, otherworldly experience moving to a big city and just even abrasively adjusting to that new environment. Um, and then also, I kind of mentioned my brother was still living up there too. So it wasn't completely, it's not like I didn't have anyone up there,
Yeah.
or any support up there, rather. And so, a big, a huge thing for me, right? Going back to dance, which is pretty expected
Hmm.
given um, like how we know each other and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I gotta shout out Amor Ledesma because she hooked me up when I was still on Lost and Found in high school. She did me like the biggest solid and was so supportive of me going up, and she connected me with people on the camp specifically
Mm.
Montenegro.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was like making phone calls for me, and she was giving me numbers of all these different people. And it's like she wanted me to succeed in dance up there, and she was going out of her way to do it for me. Um,
Awesome.
that's something I like will always remember, you know. So shout out to her.
Shout
She's
out to
awesome.
more. Yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
then, so I actually, and then at that point, I was pretty new to the dance community. So I didn't really know what the camp was to begin with. You know, I didn't
Mm.
know about the company and APT and Gen 2 and all of that. I guess the scene up there. And so she totally introduced me to all those people. And I went to the audition for APT, and I was fortunate enough to get on. And so that became pretty much a huge part of my life up there, just being a part of rehearsals and hanging out with friends from dance and stuff like that, right? Because that ultimately is just what happens when you're a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was probably one of the best things. Definitely probably one of the highlights, if not the highlight of going up there, was getting to be connected with the dance community up there. And I had a lot of help from people down here to do that. So that was awesome.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, that just goes to show it's that connection and that
Mm-hmm.
impact, and her really seeing something in you and really wanting to support you, not just saying it but doing it. And that's just like, that's really heartwarming to hear that, because
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of person she is, and knowing who she was supporting in you is just awesome, and to know that
Yeah.
that's affected you in such a positive way.
Yeah.
Um, and you were in the Bay for 2 years, correct?
I was. Yeah. That's
Right.
correct.
So if you can just take us through, the mentality of, usually it's like, all right, undergrad in and out, 4 years, 5 years if you're doing engineering, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Taking us through the your mentality of, when you were like, okay, I'm gonna go back to San Diego. What was going on in your head? How did you come to that decision? Take us through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, it was really, or okay, one big thing was between my sophomore year and junior year, I got my financial aid package for my what would have been my junior year at USF, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had cut my financial aid. They had cut it
Completely.
like not completely, but a decent amount.
Mm.
Um, and then already on top of that, my bills were racking up. I was living somewhere off campus, so I was paying San Francisco rent,
Mm.
and it was on top of all those things, like cost of living is way up. And I had mentioned like parking tickets and small little things like that kind of added to a giant raging fire of like, hey, I don't know if you're making the best financial decision being up here, right? And then also thinking about the opportunity cost of me being up there versus being down here in San Diego, being close to family, learning about my mom and what she does in her business, and then also as well like being away from friends and all of that kind of added to me just saying, hey, maybe you should just find options, look at your options and figure out what you want to do. Maybe even if that means taking a gap year, because I wasn't totally opposed to that either, just taking the time off. I mean, reevaluating what I wanted to do. I had already invested a lot of money in terms of tuition, in terms of rent, all those other things by being in the Bay in the first place. And I
Yeah.
felt like it wasn't paying off for me. Um, and so I, yeah. And then I had worked a couple jobs up there, and I think I didn't fall. I know, having been there, I know a lot of people who still work up there and got jobs and stuff like that. And they really fell in love with that lifestyle in the Bay, specifically talking about like working for a startup or working for companies that are based in Silicon Valley, but being in the city and having an apartment, in the financial district, all those things. I really didn't fall in love with that, the way that I thought that I would going in as a freshman. I really felt like, oh man, I just want to go home and I want to go to the beach. I want to eat California burritos and go on hikes and just chill out at home.
Yeah.
That I guess, and that's goes back to what I said at the very beginning about how it took me those 2 years up there to appreciate what I took for granted down here. Um, and then on top of that, I also was doing my research about finding programs that had a real estate school of real estate, and so
Mm,
USD just popped up, and that's why I'm saying a lot of things just fell together, which tends to happen, right? But
mhm.
that's sort of the things that happen to uh, transition me down back to San Diego.
No, absolutely. And I don't want to make it a thing that like this was just a quick stint and you're in San Francisco and it was, you're like, all right, I don't want to be here. If you can
Mm-hmm.
maybe just, shed some light on some of the great things that you did learn and the
Mm,
takeaways, like kind of, okay, because there is an importance in that, right? Leaving
sure.
home and seeing a different part of the world and then taking that back if you do decide to go home or going elsewhere. If you just talk about some of the, good, great things that you learned being in the city, being at University of San Francisco,
Mm.
and taking that back to San Diego.
Yeah, I think generally it's just being independent, right? That's such a huge lesson to learn, and the lesson I haven't been learning these past few years because I'm living at home now. But being independent, learning how to cook for yourself, clean for yourself, negotiate with your roommates, all of that is
Mm,
like those are very important life lessons for you to learn as a young adult, and what transitions you into being a full adult, right? So that in itself was a huge lesson, just living by myself and being on my own accord. And then I guess more specific to San Francisco, I think I just got to meet so many different people. I got to meet people from all over the world um, who all just happened to be in San Francisco. I got to meet people who were native to the Bay and got to hear their perspective on different things. Just got to feed off of a lot of different um, conversations and a lot of different, I guess, mindsets that I don't think I would have down here, if that makes sense. I'm
mm.
just being in a very big transient city like San Francisco. It's that's just the nature of being in a big city, right? Um, and then I think it was a big wake up call, just what we were talking about a little bit uh, before your last question. This current question was learning where your break even is, and learning, am I financially okay to be here?
Mm,
Is my trajectory of where I want to be hindered by my current situation? And where do I even want to be later on?
mm,
Do I want to be in San Francisco? Get a job here and probably make my whole, I guess, young adult life here.
mm.
I mean, those things I guess you develop a sense for when you live in different places. Now I can clearly say that down here, and I'm gonna be working down here.
Mhm.
I can clearly say, yeah, I'd see myself staying here for a really long time. Um, that's something that I didn't feel when I was up in the Bay. It's something that I'm considering and will consider if I ever move somewhere else. It's like you had to understand um, how you're building your switching costs when you're living somewhere. And by switching costs, I mean how expensive is it for you to switch? If you live in a city, you get your education there, you get a job there, you get an apartment, maybe you get a house, maybe you get kids, you're going to stay there. Your cost of switching is so high. You're not going to be able
Mhm.
to go somewhere else, like, so that's the kind of things that I feel like I learned just living anywhere else. I mean, specifically in San Francisco is a good lesson to be learned because it's very exaggerated, the cost of living and all those expenses and stuff. So yeah, that's those are the lessons that I feel like um, were imperative or very, very important for me to learn when I was up there. And I'm so glad that I went up there. And you're right, it's not all just, oh man, parking tickets and car the fog and all this weather and it's I learned a
Yeah.
lot when I was up there, and I'm really, really fortunate to even have had that opportunity to move up to the Bay. So yeah.
Absolutely. And this is something that I kind of experienced a few years ago and that transition going back home. So you, like you said, you learn all these important life skills, time management, learning how to negotiate with roommates, being
Mm-hmm.
independent, cooking for yourself. So you've become so much of yourself in the past couple of years and just learning and then moving back home. That is in itself an adjustment. And then, being back home,
Mm-hmm.
one, when you adjusted and you ended up going to USD, did you end up dorming on campus or were you back at home? And then two, so adjustment, moving back to San Diego, and then
Mm-hmm.
living situation, and then also adjustment, being in a new college,
Mm-hmm.
starting over
I,
again.
yeah. So I lived at home, and that was one of the big things was like, I'm going to move home and I'm going to save. all this rent or this money that would be paid to rent.
Mm,
That was like a big thing for me. It's like, and then on top of that, I'm going to be at home and I'm going to help out my mom any way that I can and
mm,
just be that support for her. And just keep her company, and just get to enjoy. Oh, that's another thing, that a really strong, I guess, theme or message that I've always thought about. It's like, I have a lot of friends, and this is specific to, this is a kind of a tangent, but it's also related, but it's more specific to family, right? I have a lot of friends who moved away for college and they live in like Boston, for example, somewhere on the East Coast. And kind of like I was saying, they're building up their switching costs. They're living
mm.
there and they can't even probably imagine coming back home to live. Even now, it's only been like a year after graduation, right?
Yeah.
The only time they'll ever get to come back home and experience family will be, I don't know, when they're 30 and their parents are, you know, probably, depending on how old their parents are. But in my situation, if I were in the same shoes, my parents would be kind of elderly and not really being able to do anything. And it's like a big thing for me was coming back, being with family. It was like I want to enjoy the good years that my family still has, specifically like my mom
Mm.
and my dad still have. I want to be young back home while they're still young too, so we can do cool stuff like, I don't know, go on walks or go rollerblade or do anything, right? Or even just small things like cook together. Because I always imagine it would be such a shame to move somewhere else, have a family, buy a house, whatever, and then you only ever come back to visit your parents when they're like sick or something. But that was something that was very powerful for me coming back home. Was like, all right, this is going to be a hell of a time, right? Getting to be young while my parents are still young, my family is still young, right? And then on top of that, going back to what we were your original question about school, it was a tough adjustment for sure. I never really adjusted to UST. I never really had social groups. I met a lot of kids on campus, but um, a lot of the kids that I met were just people I didn't really see myself clicking with to begin with. Um, I still obviously had to put on the hat of like networking with kids in the school of business and building those kind of relationships. And I have, it has, even now it has served me very well to build those relationships on campus, but those were never to me, um, like purely social. They were always like kind of business motivated. Just interacting with some of the kids on campus. And then on top of that, as you know, I tried out and was fortunate enough to be on Gwownups. So that was like all my entire leisure life outside of school. I would go to school, I would commute to school, be there for however long my classes were, maybe stay for some extracurriculars and whatnot, and then I would just come go to rehearsal. So all those things uh, were the adjustment that happened. Here, sorry, do you mind if I pick up and move somewhere else?
No, yeah, no worries. We're gonna we're gonna go through Nathan's house.
Segue.
Taking us
Grand
as a
tour.
journey. No, I love it.
Grand
I
tour.
love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Are we going outside today? Are we?
Yeah, we're going outside.
I love it.
So,
You
so we found, okay, this is gonna sound kind of gross, but it's not that bad. We found a couple roaches in our
Oh,
house.
okay.
Yeah. And so we are exterminating. We don't want to take a chance, right? We don't want to be like,
Absolutely.
oh, are they, are they nesting? So we called an exterminator pretty quickly to come out and spray down all the baseboards in the house.
Oh,
So
absolutely. You got to
yeah.
get it done. It's beautiful, man. It's probably super hot though, huh?
Oh, it's okay. It's not that bad.
It's all right.
Oh, is this okay?
That's perfect.
Is the audio okay, Ryan?
Yeah, I think we're good. I think yeah. I think we're good. You sound good on my end.
Okay, cool.
You kind of said it, Nathan, here. You talking about, getting onto grown-ups and I would love for you to just take us to even, for those that are listening that may not know what that is, it's a dance
Mm,
company that
mm-hmm.
where Nathan and I met. But if you could just talk about one, how you even got introduced to dance and obviously the impact
Oh,
that it's had
whoa.
in your life. It's played a role both in San Diego and outside of San Diego. So if you can just shed some light on that and your experience.
Oh, uh, like going way back.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, I started b-boying. I started sessioning at a local rec center, and there are a bunch of older guys who had this crew called Recognition. I don't know if that rings a bell or not, but they're kind of this crew that would just session around, and they were always open about like teaching us younger. I think I was in like middle school or something,
Mm.
just showing us like stuff, like spreading the knowledge basically, building the community kind of there. So I did that for a while, and then I met some people in who would take classes at 429. Um, Actually, my siblings used to take classes there too.
Hmm.
And so I would always go, I guess, with my mom to pick them up. And then I would always watch, but then I would never imagine myself actually doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like I would even go to culture shock and like watch my brother outside the window when I was really young. Um, but it never clicked to me like, oh man, you could do this too. But I always thought it was awesome. I always like, this
Mm.
is freaking amazing. Like, what is going on? Like, blew my mind as a kid, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people feel like that. And so I I met a couple people who would take classes. I don't know if you know someone named Jack Dong. I
Sounds
think he was
familiar.
I think he was on some junior team at Fortune, but
Okay.
he basically told me to come take class at Fortune. I forgot whose class it was. Yeah, I forgot whose class it was. And then from there, I just started to take more, I guess, classes in choreography. And I tried out for my school's dance team at Torrey Pines, and I got on, and that basically sparked, um, I guess, the dance bug or the dance journey.
Mm.
And then I guess my biggest introduction to more of like the community that we know was I had friends on Torrey, Torrey Pines dance team who were also on Lost and Found.
Hmm.
And so they told me like, hey man, you should try out, you should try out. So my junior year, no, actually it was my senior year of high school. I tried out for Lost and Found. And then Carlo and Amor and Sai took me. So um, that was my introduction to like learning more about the community, that community. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And then the rest of the story you kind of know about moving up there. And
Hmm.
then, wait, did you actually ask a question about grown-ups too?
Yeah, I mean, let's get into it. Let's do it.
Okay. Uh, well, yeah, grown-ups is a team that we were on, and from my impression, it was like a lot of the kids on Lost and Found were aging out, and then they didn't have like a dance home anymore, I guess, or a
Hmm.
dance team to go to. And then also, you know, a lot of people in San Diego from different communities were like that.
Yeah.
And so I guess that Grown Ups was kind of born out of the idea that this is going to be a home for a lot of people who don't have a home.
Mm.
Um, and that just so happened to be me, but I just moved back home, you know? It just
Yeah.
so happened that I was moving back home. And so,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I tried out. I was fortunate enough to get on. And then I feel like that team was, um, there were so many different people from different dance walks, you know, on different
Mm.
teams with
Yeah.
different histories and stuff. So it was always such a privilege, I feel like, to just talk to people on that team because you learn a whole lot of dance, their personal dance history. And I always thought that was so interesting, you know?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, like even hearing, I don't know if we ever talked about it, but I think I heard it from someone or something. But even like learning that you're on formality, like when you're
Oh my
when
god.
you're on when you were like two or something like that. And like I don't know, just tiny things like that. It's like really interesting and exciting in fact. Because like where
Yeah.
else can you learn that stuff, right? So
Mm.
so that was one of the first teams where I felt especially growing up in San Diego, it's more of like a blow your mind kind of thing. I experienced
Yeah.
the same thing in San Francisco, but like or the Bay, but I didn't really know much about the Bay, so it wasn't as meaningful.
Mm.
And then yeah, just being under Carlo and Amor's direction again was like an awesome uh, a privilege coming back home. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And
and I got to meet you too. Yeah, good stuff.
I know, man. It's pretty awesome how it's all kind of come a full circle. And with everything that you're into and being so into business, entrepreneurship, and even financial literacy, and really just doing your own research,
Hmm.
I don't even know if you can correlate these two, but with dance playing such a huge role in your life, I don't know if there's any takeaways or skills you've learned in dance that you may have
Yeah.
been able to apply outside of the dance studio, if you can
Oh
speak on
yeah.
that.
Yeah, completely. Um, yeah, they definitely relate, and maybe not so much like finance, accounting, and dance, but more so like just general business traits or traits that you need in business. It's not even business traits, but just general traits that you need to be a good business person or someone operating in business are totally relevant to the same skills that you learn with dance, which, it's the same situation, right, with sports too, you know, um, or whatever leisure hobby or passion that you do, you learn plenty of life skills that apply to a professional career, just period, just generally. Um, it actually relates. I think I said the same at the end of a retreat last year for Gwownups. I wrote a letter to Carlo and Amora and Michelle, and I said all those things in it. But I was basically telling them like the amount of times that I've used dance as an example in like a job interview to highlight that I've learned different life skills from dance. Like I
Mm,
couldn't count them on one finger. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
I'll tell them like attention to detail, dedication, hard work, perseverance, all those things I've learned through dance. How to network with people, how to socialize with
Mm,
people from different backgrounds, from different walks of life. Um, and within dance itself, I guess just more generally applies to a bunch of different things. It's just being passionate about something, and sticking with something. Those are all things that like every job employer wants to hear. And when you kind of wrap it up in a package that's really and interesting as dance, like a lot of
mhm.
job employers would be like, "Oh, you're a dancer? Like, what does that ever mean?" I'm never ashamed. I used to be ashamed of it, but I'm never
Mm,
anymore now that I take this kind of perspective on it. It's like it's unique, it's interesting, and it's totally relevant to all those things. Specifically talking about like if you wanted to work for a company or something, like you could totally pull from that bag because rightfully so. Like I've learned so much through dance that applies to all of the things that I do on the job, for example.
yeah.
Um, but it's just about how you are able to connect that in your own head and recognize that in your own space, I guess.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that letter is pretty good. I spent a lot of time writing that letter. Maybe Michelle remembers, but
I'll
probably
have to,
not.
I'll
Probably
have,
not.
I'll have to ask, but I know that, in talking with all of them individually, they've always spoke very highly of you. And that was something even I
Oh
picked up.
wow.
No, yeah, honestly, honest to God truth. And even just all my interactions with you have been nothing but honestly great. And I don't even know if you remember, but aside from, playing basketball with each other a couple times, but
Hmm.
I remember there was a time, I don't know if I posted it or if I said it, but it was at the time when I was teaching at a studio in LA,
Oh
Snow
yeah.
Globe, and you came up, and
Yeah.
I remember just it's always good vibes. It's always thought provoking conversation that I just feel like I always feel like you're there
Mm.
and you're intentional, and I always learn something new. And then even then flipping that switch and being in class, and I remember watching the videos after, and even the other groups, or when we did the select or when I did the solo, like even your energy, like just so selfless and giving and like literally cheering. It was just like it really just speaks volumes to who you are, and it's just like super awesome to like see that in a different light, like not just in the dance space, but also seeing like how you've kind of taken it in like the other walks of life that you've been in. And I just wanted to
Mm.
say like thank you for that, and I
Wow.
just really appreciate you, man, for who you are. And that's obviously a reason why I was super excited to have you on here today.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of now going into kind of what we're currently in right now,
Uh,
Nathan, and obviously being in a pandemic,
hmm.
there's so many there's so many thoughts that are going on right now. If you can maybe just speak a little bit about with you being a recent grad and
Hmm.
just talking about that mental of just
Yeah.
going into the job market and it's COVID, and
Yeah.
life is very different, and no one could have prepared for this. If you can just talk about like you know what what's the mentality going into it? Like it's got to be really tough, and I'm just really interested to hear what you have to
Mhm.
say.
Yeah. So you're completely right. The job market is tough right now. It is just that's the nature of it. Um, and it's not like this is anything new, right? We go through recessions
Hmm.
periodically every couple of years or every
Absolutely.
decade or whatever.
Hmm.
But I think for someone who is trying to get a job, I guess more so in the corporate realm, now is the time that you should be working even harder than ever to find opportunities. And a good example is like um, this is going to be a tangent. This is going to be a tangent. But
Let's do it.
you remember when or people use the term physically distance, right?
Hmm.
I don't like that word. Oh no. I totally fucked it up.
All right, do it over, do it over.
Reverse. You know when people use the word socially distance,
Hmm.
I don't like that word because a better word should be physically different distance. And in fact, you should be more socially present with people than you ever have been because you have tools that you need to utilize and people are actually expecting you to do that kind of due diligence as a future job, as a future member of the job market, right? So if you're not doing all you can to just go on LinkedIn and reach out to random people in fields that you want to be in or who work at a company that you want to be in or reaching out to old coworkers that you haven't talked to in a long time, if you're not actively doing all those things with the very, you know, easy tools that we have to reach out and connect and to network. Um, Network isn't the best word always to use to connect, right, with people. You got to be working harder, or you could be doing more to help you achieve your goals. I think a lot of people they kind of treat it differently. It's like because there's a pandemic and because we're facing a recession, now is the time to kind of shut down or to kind of to lull, right? But
Yeah.
it's actually the opposite. You have to be working harder than you ever have to sharpen your tools, to learn new things, to get a degree, to get a technical certification, to take classes, to earn a technical certification. Now is the time to do it, right? Rather than and at the same time, it's such a difficult time as well. I'm not saying that you can't take the time to just decompress and just soak in all of the kind of trauma that's happening right now. That's in everyone's right to do so. But specifically talking about, like I said, people who would be in my situation, um, there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of work that you could be actively doing in order to make your goals happen. And that applies to everything, but more specifically, I think I have a little bit more um, right to talk about that because I'm going through it right now. I was fortunate enough to have had my job still lined up, you know, just push back. But I know plenty of people who landed the career of the job of their dream post grad, and it just got slashed, you know, and they're devastated by it. But rather, I think they should just take it as an opportunity to just bounce back even harder. Um, that's the kind of mindset that I have, and I understand a lot of the times it's way easier said than done. Um, but that's yeah, that's my mentality for people who are going through the really difficult time that we're in right now. You know, I'm going to keep going, but with all that we have in terms of technology and all the information and all the knowledge that is basically like mastermind into all of us, we can all access all this information whenever we want to, take a course whenever we want to. Um, you have to be that much more. You can't even think of it as like, oh, I'm going to take these classes and become a more stronger person. It's more so like you better take those classes because your competition, you know, your competition is going to be doing the same thing, or you have to assume that at least like kind of having a more competitive spirit. And maybe that's something that um, you resonate with being into sports and stuff like that. But yeah, those are all, I mean, that's just kind of like a huge cluster F of thoughts that I've been thinking about during this really, really difficult time. So,
No, absolutely, and I appreciate that. And I think that that was honestly really, really beautifully said. And we won't get into where, but I want to say congratulations on getting your job, and maybe just talking a little bit now, kind of looking at the positives, and just talking. I know you don't start till the end of the year, so
mm-hmm.
maybe just talking about how you kind of have a little bit of like a summer vacation before you kind of start. So
Mm,
maybe, and obviously this wasn't handed to you. This is something you worked your ass off for. You were fortunate enough to get the opportunity, and you did it right.
mm-hmm.
If you can just talk about what it's like to, you kind of have some time to just reset and to just get your mind right and to get focused before you actually start rather than just
Right.
jumping into a job. So if you can just talk about like your dynamic of just like how you have a little break before you get to start into the workforce.
Yeah. So it's not a little break. It's been a really long break. It's been like, I think maybe like 6 months or something like that. Um, and for a while, specifically over summer, I treated it as such. And I think you have to have that mindfulness about when to take breaks, right? And when to. I'm just talking to Michelle about that, right? Like, you had to be mindful about when you really need a break and when that will actually create value, as opposed to you just working your ass off, indefinitely, right? So I took some time to decompress, but um, I feel like I hate to sound so aggressive, or so like,
It's
you had
okay.
to do this, you do this, but I think I have that personality where I just want to, uh, I want to work, right? So throughout, and it wasn't to me like, oh, this is a break. It was like, oh, this is 6 months or however long for me to sharpen my tools before I start working. And then in fact, it wasn't me saying like, oh, you still have a job later down the line starting in December. It was like, okay, you're 6 months behind. You know, you you're 6 months behind from where you should have started. That's plenty of time um, that you're going to lose, especially we're facing a recession. I'm going to start remotely, which is going to be a huge challenge as well. Like I need to make myself give them no reasons or as little reasons as possible to like let me go in the case that they start laying people off. I would be
Yeah.
the first one to go,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then like I said, I hate to like, maybe it sounds pretty pessimistic, I think it sounds really like, um, go, 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 go. It doesn't sound very pleasant, but I think that's just like the way that I think about it. And I'm not saying necessarily like you have to be that way. And also talking about what we're saying in terms of like the job market, but that's just how I feel, and my opinion about how I feel in terms of all those things that are going on, and in terms of the job that I will be starting soon. Um, so I've been training a lot, taking additional classes, taking online courses for different, I guess, technical things in Excel and other programs that I need to learn. And that has been my break. And then dancing as much as I can. I've been trying to dance as much as I can, because that's really a privilege. To dance is a privilege for sure.
Yeah.
And if I get to take class all the time, I'm going to do it. It's not even like I'm just going to do it. So, and that's how we saw each other. So
Well,
yeah.
I'm happy you're still, I know you've been working a lot and doing behind the scenes in preparation for, going into your job. But I think it's really awesome that you still created space and time and energy to still commit to dance, and you being on culture shock and you taking
Mm,
class and really having a full workload. Like, yeah, it's like it's one thing to not have a job, but then we're all still working in our own way. And I
yeah.
still love how you're optimizing your time and making the most of it. And that just speaks volumes to, you as a person. With the pandemic and what's going on right now, I'm just curious as to like, what are your thoughts of what you think is going to happen
Mm,
over the next year? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, obviously, I feel like we went about this maybe not in the best way, but what's your kind of
mm,
outlook on just like what do you think is going to happen to like the world, or like what just your view, your 2 cents on like
mm.
post COVID life?
I think that um, I feel like I gotta be careful because I just feel like that's pretty big topic.
Yeah.
But I think the U.S. has so much to learn from other countries that have gone through this already. I have a little cousin in um, Shanghai, and when this first started, she wasn't allowed to go outside for 2 months for anything. They got delivered everything,
Mm-hmm.
and that level of and I remember listening to it and I was like, man, that sucks. Like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But I think that just speaks to us as Americans and being so privileged and just privileged period that we don't
Yeah.
want to do anything for like a greater good of public health
Yes.
for our country, and not just public health but economic health too. Like
Mm.
you can't fix the economy without fixing the pandemic, right? That's something that a lot of politicians are talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for us here in the US, it's not even like, oh, what's going to happen, this is my mom.
Hey.
She's cleaning. But
I
it's
love
it's
it.
not
Little
even a
guest
question of
appearance.
like, yeah, little cameo. It's not even a question of like, oh, we have no clue. Okay, it is a question of like we have no clue what's going to happen, but it's not like we don't know what to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because there's so much that we can learn from other countries that have gone through the same exact thing and have solved their problems comparatively to ours to a huge
Mm.
extent. It's not like, oh, we don't know what to do, so we're not going to solve this problem. It's like we are deliberately um, choosing to go down in my opinion, like the worst case scenario. So,
Preach that. Preach that. I completely agree 100%. Yes, you couldn't have said it better.
so that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah. It's a lot. Nathan, you've taken us, through your narrative, and obviously this is, there's so much deeper that we can get into, and
Mm-hmm.
you just talking about growing up in San Diego and having moved around and being really kinetic in that sense, and going to school in the Bay and then coming back, and then dance playing a huge role in your life, and your parents being such big influences on you.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of wrapping everything up, Nathan. Everything that you've experienced and all the spaces you've been in and all the people that you've encountered. I just want to ask you, what would you tell your 13-year-old self?
Whoa. Oh, huh. Start dancing earlier. Start dancing ASAP. If I were talking to my 13-year-old self, um, I think that is tough. I think if I were talking to my 13-year-old self, like you would also have to consider that you're talking to a 13-year-old, right? But I think of all the things that I've learned right now, I think some of the biggest lessons that I've learned, um, I think one thing is just to keep moving forward, you know, like keep moving forward in a general sense, like keep advancing towards the things that you sought out to do.
Mm.
But within each thing that you're doing, you got to move forward. You got to finish the job kind of thing. It's kind of like you should never half-ass anything because you never know. Like my grandma used to always say, um, well, I think this is like a pretty well-known story. I think I read from a book,
Hmm.
um, or like a analogy or anecdote where there are all these miners that are mining this cave and they're just digging, and then they are digging for so long that they give up, but they're like an inch away from striking gold, right? So I think that that's super powerful. You never know when you're about to strike gold. So the only thing that you can do is just keep going and then finish everything off, do a
Mm.
good job at everything, and then keep chugging along. Because like with that mentality, it doesn't really matter. That's a mentality that relates to everything. It's not just a job or sports or dance. It's like your relationships with people, you know. So that's the only thing I could think of pulling out of my ass. That's a tough question, but I guess that's what I would say. One of the many things I would say to myself.
Yeah. Well, one, Nathan, I just want to say that I appreciate you for being so transparent and opening up to us about a lot of different things and touching on so many different subjects. And two, I think when I asked you to come on this, I felt like you didn't know if I was really serious. And it's just cool to like actually sit down here with you and to do it and to be like, this
Mm-hmm.
was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And, hopefully at some point, maybe once you start working at your job, we'll definitely have to catch up again. And we
Yeah,
have to have you back on and we'll have to touch base. And, we'll just kind of see where the current state of things are at that
mm,
point.
like an
So I
update.
just, yeah, exactly. So I just, want to say thank you again for your time today. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to the next time that we get to catch up with you. And I just want to say thank you again, man. I got much love for you.
Yeah, I wanted to say at the very beginning when you weren't even recording yet, but this feels so legit, like being on a podcast. Or it is a podcast, you
Yeah,
know? And when I first heard it from you, like you're right, I didn't know what to expect.
yeah,
But then also, you're a great host, you're a great host, you're a great personality, and
thank you.
you have a nice voice too,
Thank you.
but this is really really cool. Like this is real, and not only that, it's great. I'm so glad that um, found you found this and you really stuck to it, because I feel like it's a really really good thing you got going, and that's just my opinion. um, but yeah, thank you again. It was kind of weird. I was like, man, you want me on your podcast? I was like, what?
Dude, absolutely. Sometimes
What the hell?
sometimes, we I always tell this to my students and friends, and sometimes we're scared of our own potential, and it's hard to see that yourself, especially being dancers. We're probably some of the most critical people, but
Mhm.
sometimes it just takes it to hear from someone else to be like, yo, like I am the shit. Like, hell yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely.
you probably see stuff in me that I don't, and vice versa. And you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So
Yeah,
again, I couldn't be happier, and I'm super happy that you're on today, and I'm looking forward to having you the next time, man.
cool. Thank you
Appreciate
so
you,
much, Kev.
Nathan.
Thanks,
Absolutely,
Ryan.
man. I
Ryan, thank
know.
you.
Shout out to the PA. Ryan's never gonna give. He's
Say
never gonna ask for
something.
credit. Yeah.
Do you exist?
We'll see you soon, Nathan. Appreciate you, man.
Okay, see ya.